Profile of Indian economy. We were discussing about the profile of Indian economy and we have already discussed about the liberalization. Now we will be discussing about the liberalization and structural adjustments. So that is the page number 171. Now we are moving on to the structural adjustment program. So, structural adjustment program is actually a set of economic reforms that a country must follow in order to secure the loan from International Monetary Fund or the World Bank. So, these are some set of economic policies including the reducing government spending, opening to free trade and so on. Okay, so this is the structural adjustment program. Actually, these International Monetary Fund and World Bank, that are the Bretton Woods Conference products. Actually, this Bretton Woods Conference took place after the Second World War. So, as a product of this Bretton Woods Conference, these institutions have formed, that is the International Monetary Fund and World Bank has formed. So, this structural adjustment program means it's a set of economic reforms that a country should follow in order to secure the loan from IMF as well as the World Bank. അതായത് നമ്മുടെ ഇൻ്റർനാഷണൽ ഇൻസ്റ്റിറ്റ്യൂഷൻസ് ആയ IMF അല്ലെങ്കിൽ വേൾഡ് ബാങ്കിൽ നിന്ന് നമുക്കൊരു ലോണ് ഒബ്റ്റെയിൻ ചെയ്യാൻ വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് ഒരു രാജ്യം ഫോളോ ചെയ്യേണ്ട സർട്ടൈൻ എക്കണോമിക് റിഫോംസ് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ എക്കണോമിക് പോളിസീസിനെയാണ് നമ്മൾ സ്ട്രക്ചറൽ അഡ്ജസ്റ്റ്മെൻറ്റ് പ്രോഗ്രാംസ് എന്നുകൊണ്ട് പറയുന്നത്. ഓക്കെ, so actually structural adjustment it includes certain economic policies including reducing the government spending, okay, reducing the government welfare activities towards the people, opening the free trade, also allowing more countries to enter into our country. All these things are the certain policies in the structural adjustment program. So, actually, this structural adjustment programs contain certain things like devaluing the currencies to reduce the balance of payment deficit. Actually, we have to devalue the currency of the particular country. Okay, for example, India, in order to reduce the balance of payment deficit. Actually, balance of payment means the difference between import and export. In order to reduce the balance of payment deficit, we have to devalue the currency. Second one, cutting the public sector employment subsidies and other spending to reduce the budget deficit. So actually cutting the public sector employment subsidies and other spendings, all these things are the government welfare activities towards the people. We have to cut down all these things in order to reduce the budget deficit. Actually, there will be budget deficit also can come. Okay, there is an expected budget as well as there is an actual budget. The difference between these two is the budget deficit. So in order to minimize that budget deficit, we have to cut down the public sector employment subsidies and other spending programs. Third one, privatizing state-owned enterprises and deregulating state-controlled industries. Privatizing the state-owned enterprises means in order to allow the private parties to enter into the industrial sector, so and to reduce the control of the government. So when we allow the private parties to enter into the areas which were earlier reserved for the government, actually the foreign people can also invest. So we are actually trying to reduce the control of the government. Fourth one is easing regulations in order to attract the investment from foreign business. So we have already discussed that we were having too many regulations and restrictions. So we have to minimize these regulations and restrictions in order to attract the foreign investors. Last one is closing tax loopholes and improving the tax collection domestically. So in order to tax is actually the revenue for the government. So we have to close all the tax loopholes and we have to collect the tax strictly from the people. So these are the things or some of the conditions a country have to perform in order to be in order to attain loan from the IMF or the വേൾഡ് ബാങ്ക്. അതായത് നമ്മൾ നമ്മുടെ രാജ്യത്തെ കറൻസി ഡിവാല്യൂ ചെയ്യണം, അതുപോലെ തന്നെ പബ്ലിക് സെക്ടർ എംപ്ലോയ്മെൻറ്റ് ഓപ്പർച്യൂണിറ്റീസ് നമ്മൾ കട്ട് ഡൗൺ ചെയ്യണം, സബ്സിഡീസ് കുറയ്ക്കണം, അതുപോലെ തന്നെ നമ്മുടെ സ്റ്റേറ്റ് ഓൺഡ് എൻ്റർപ്രൈസസ് ഒക്കെ നമ്മൾ കുറേ പ്രൈവറ്റൈസ് ചെയ്യണം, പിന്നെ നമ്മുടെ റൂൾസും റെഗുലേഷൻസും ഒക്കെ നമ്മൾ മിനിമൈസ് ചെയ്തിട്ട് ഫോറിൻ ഇൻവെസ്റ്റേഴ്സിനെ അട്രാക്റ്റ് ചെയ്യണം. അതുപോലെ തന്നെ ടാക്സ് പേയ്മെൻറ്റിലുള്ള ലൂപ്പ് ഹോൾസ് എല്ലാം നമ്മൾ എന്ത് ചെയ്യണം, അടയ്ക്കണം. അത് അങ്ങനെ അടച്ചിട്ടുണ്ടെങ്കിൽ ആൾക്കാർ ടാക്സ് വെട്ടിക്കുന്നതൊക്കെ നമുക്ക് എന്ത് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റും, മിനിമൈസ് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റും. സോ ഈ കണ്ടീഷൻസ് ഒക്കെയാണ് നമ്മൾ എന്ത് ചെയ്യേണ്ടത്, ഫോളോ ചെയ്യേണ്ടത്. Next one is the structural adjustment program. So that package of the structural adjustment programs includes the liberalization of the trade and elimination of the protective barriers to make the domestic industry more competitive. So liberalizing, we have already discussed about the liberalization. So we have to liberalize all the rules and regulations, so that all the protective barriers can be eliminated, so that the industry will be becoming more competitive. Next one is liberalizing the banking system and privatization of state controlled banks in the agricultural industry. So liberalizing we know that we have many nationalized banks. So liberalizing the banking sector policies and all, and making many of the nationalized banks as the private sector banks. Third one is the privatization of state controlled commercial, financial and industrial enterprises. So actually we have already discussed about the industrial policy and all. During that time, too many industries were reserved for the public sector. Actually we have to privatize all these industries in order to attract more customers, more investments or more private parties. Next one is the withdrawal of the state from the social sector programs like education and health, nutrition. So the privatization of these programs on the principal cost recovery. Actually the state having a huge investment in the education, health as well as in the nutrition sector. So government has to withdraw from all these things, and we have to attract more the private parties in order to invest in all these things. And next one is the tax reforms leading to a greater tax burden on the middle income groups. The registration of small agricultural producers and units of the informed urban sector part of tax reforms. So we have made many tax reforms. So these tax reforms has brought a heavier burden on the people. So these are the some things in the package of the structural adjustment programs. Next we are moving on to the privatization. We have many times discussed about the privatization and all. Privatization means allowing the private parties in order to enter into the industries which were earlier reserved for the public sector enterprises, were earlier reserved for the government parties. So here we are allowing the private parties to enter into those areas which were earlier reserved for the public sector enterprises. So the privatization of the India, which includes decentralization, the transfer of ownership of the productive assets to the private sector. Decentralization means we are actually privatizing too many industries which were actually reserved for the which were earlier reserved for the public sector enterprises. Next one is the entry of private sector industries into those areas exclusively reserved for the public sector or which were considered exclusively for monopolies of the state. Here we are allowing the people in order to enter into those areas which were earlier completely reserved for the public sector. And next one is limiting the scope of the public sector or no more diversification of the existing public sector enterprises. So here we are not third one is the we are limiting the scope of the public sector enterprises by not allowing diversification of the public sector enterprises. So these are the three processes which took place as a part of the privatization in India. That is the first one is the honor of transfer ownership from the public sector to private sector, and next one is the allowing to enter into those areas which were earlier completely reserved for the public sector enterprises, and next one is the limiting the public sector enterprises from more diversification. So these are the processes which took place in India as a part of the diversification. Now we will be discussing the main objectives of the privatization. So the process of improving the industrial efficiency, that is one of the main objective of the privatization. Second one is to make the public sector undertaking strong and able efficient enterprises, and third one is to ensure the efficient utilization of all the available resources, and fourth one is the government to concentrate on those areas, educational and administration and infrastructure, and give up the responsibility of looking after the business and running industries. So when the privatization is taking place, actually the government can concentrate only on the few areas and they can give complete attention on that area. So these are the main objectives of the privatization.